So, welcome back to another episode of Builder's Education, where we cover various concepts of building. I have changed the intro, feedback would be appreciated in the comments. And today, we're going to be covering gradients, which are very nice for decorating builds and give that extra pizzazz to set you aside from other builders. So, I'd give you an example of a gradient on a build, but unfortunately, I'm still rather new to this concept. So, if you want to see a gradient on a build, just Google it online, because master builders typically use them all the time, specifically people like Green, who are very good at them. So, I'd recommend watching some of their videos to get an even better grasp. So, here we have a gradient, and they're pretty easy to generate. You kind of just look at blocks, so I just set out every gray or black block. If you're creating that kind of thing, you start from one color and shift to another color. And if the color is roughly the same color, then just do normal texturing tactics. So I'm going to be covering this black to white one, and what you want to do is just lay down a bunch of black to white blocks and arrange them in an order. So roughly 8 to 9 blocks to keep it simple. So get it in the right order and ignore the block textures for the most part, because you can see why is wool in here. Well, it blends in rather well, even though you can definitely see that texture just within the art within. It doesn't affect the build that much. So this works on very tall builds. So start by building a giant frame for something. So say 5 by 30. So I have built a giant wall out of something easy to mine. So I chose sand, although the gravity isn't necessarily the best. Still, choose something easy to mine. But don't choose sand, because in reality this is actually going to be very annoying to work on. So what you want to do now is section it into equal parts. So we have 8 blocks, and this is 30 blocks tall. Do the math. If you have a decimal, then I typically go for the thing at the end. So we have white right here, so I'd give a bigger section to white. So we have this. What we want to do is just make the tower go up with alternating sides of something easy to distinguish. So if you have black and white, then don't do gray. That's actually going to be in there. Instead, do something that sticks out. And one thing that always sticks out is magenta glazed terracotta, because that block is, well, awful. So, use something that you can differentiate, and each of these sections is going to be a little bit of a blending zone for each block. So, we have this, and since, well, this top part has nothing else going, then we can just do that. So if it doesn't work out like this, then you just have to reorganize the sections like this, where I admittedly just failed to do math. So we have this, and now we have 8 equal sections. So prepare your blocks and get ready to build. So with the block replaced to something a lot easier to work with, now we want to replace the very bottom layer with just a consistent line of whatever is at the bottom of your palette. So, like this, and you can make another thick layer, and progressively you want to make more pieces missing of it. So, kind of like this, you can see I'm including less blackstone, so make it a bit more empty, and start replacing those holes with what's next coming up. And progressively it should go about half when you're at the border, and kind of like this, so about half the blocks. So just a little bit of counting, pretty simple, like this, and this should be about 50-50. So counting across, there's an odd number, so the next layer should have more. So like this, and progressively the blackstone is going to fade away, and we're creating like bands, which is the general idea. Then grab your next block and start incorporating the same idea onto the next thing. So, just like this, we have a bit of a gradient going. So besides the very bottom and very top layers, unless you're making your bands wider than this, then you should not have a layer that's completely one block. So don't just make one layer of just smooth basalt. Instead, just start transitioning to the next material. So, like this, we just got some smooth basalt, and then we mix in some cobbled deep slate. So, remember, it should get thicker the closer it is to its main band, and it should start spreading out with the smooth basalt the farther it is from its band. So, employ roughly the same strategies, and you should be going good. So, I'm going to go up to the halfway mark with this. So, slow but steady work on this creates the start of a gradient, and it's already looking pretty decent. So, what we need to do now is just keep going. However, some of you might be having trouble with just doing the texturing, so a simple solution that you can do is something along the lines of just kind of making the layer you have with these divided bands just all one block for now. And then you just have nice flat layers, and then that will be a lot easier to texture. I find it pretty useful to do, but depending on how much effort you're putting in just genuine survival, it might not be the best strategy. But it's worth giving it a shot if you're having trouble making it look good. So, just filling in the entire thing and then doing the blending afterwards. So, gradient is done, and what do you know? It looks pretty good. Totally not like this is my first ever gradient. So, now you just have a nice gradient, which is much better than just a simple wall. Although, it only works on larger builds, so this little blacksmith right here doesn't necessarily work. And it doesn't work well on organic builds like this one either. So, it works very well on landscaping because the different kinds of leaves can make a tree look taller. But if you're using a lot of wood, then it's not inherently the best idea. But it works amazingly on mega bases. So, we're going to practice it one more time. So, we have a white gradient, and now we're going to experiment with a bigger wall. And we're going to be using a copper gradient, starting from orange terracotta to cyan concrete, with all the copper blocks in the middle. Because these two are the most common gradients you'll most likely be using, because copper roofs are in fashion, and black and white can be used for just about everything. So, of course, start with the bottom being orange terracotta, and if you're having trouble, just make the entire thing bands of the block you're using. So, replacing this bottom layer with this, and just doing that for every single layer, and then blending it in from there. So, you can see I just did the nice banding tactic, and I'm going to just give a quick lesson of why this doesn't work, but sometimes it does. So we can see, well, we clearly need to texture it. So an important thing to note is that, of course, this doesn't look the best. But if you only have a one block wide gradient, then this works. But it has to be a perfect 1 by 1 gradient, where it's just stacked up like these. Because these work, there's no room for texturing. But for giant ones like these, it doesn't work the best. So you always have to do some amount of texturing. So please be aware of that and don't just get lazy. So blended, and now we have a nice gradient for use in coppery builds. However, one thing I'd like to point out is the use of something I'd like to call a mini gradient. So if I remove these warped stems facing upward, we'd have a very harsh jump between colors, which is the complete opposite of what you want from a gradient. You can kind of see it with the tuff here, but it's not as severe as hopping from oxidized copper to warped. So we can clearly see what's going on here, and it looks nice. So, using this knowledge, you can employ it on your roofs. So, that roof right there, instead of just using deep slate tiles and some basic texturing, you could use this, although it's not the best idea considering the palette. But you generally get the idea. You can use this for very large foundations and very large walls. You can make a more organic one. Now I have a nice path, and it's very useful for roofs. So, overall, a very useful concept to learn early on in your building career. So that way your builds look better than some of my builds, which admittedly are pretty good. Of course, that's coming from me, but of course, they can be improved with gradients. So, a very good concept to learn. So, with that, it's the end of today's video. If you enjoyed this video, remember, please like and subscribe. I really want to hear your feedback on the new intro. So, with that, take care. Gearsaw out.